Wow, what a morning.
Yes.
Well, if I wasn't nervous coming here, I am now. Did you hear those three wonderful speakers this morning?
Yes.
Dr. Williams, Dr. Burgess, Dr. Tony. Dynamic speakers for the National Coalition for Ethnic Minority and Nursing Associations. Aren't you glad you're here this morning?
Yes.
I am. So otherwise, I'd be making that trip 10 miles down west, back to St. John's, taking care of my patients, and I know that they need me, but they can handle themselves right now while I'm here, spending the day with all of you guys. So, I am here to talk about family caregivers. Why was I decided to come speak here? I am representing the Philippine Nursing Association of America. They were looking for a speaker, and they know that I live in Santa Monica, and this conference will be here in Los Angeles, so they don't have to fly me here. So when they asked me, I said yes. Dr. Georges will probably love this presentation, although she probably can't give this presentation. A lot of my data is from AARP, since I am talking about family caregivers. So thank you for all that work, and with that, let's get started. In nursing school, we all have been taught how to have course objectives or learning objectives. I am not doing that right now, but I have a roadmap. And when I was thinking of a roadmap, I was thinking of a yellow brick road. And then I realized we're not in Kansas, we're in LA. So my roadmap will be the boardwalk in Santa Monica. First half of my presentation, we'll talk about the demographics and what have shifted in terms of family caregiving. And then I will change gears and talk about the different interventions that we now do and we now know about in family caregiving, with a special focus on cancer in oncology, because that's what I do. I am a clinical nurse specialist, and I work with family caregivers in oncology. And then I will give you an exemplar of what we have done in terms of looking at the demographics and what changes we have implemented in terms of clinical practice, in terms of research, and hopefully the theme of our workshop, our seminar today, in terms of policy and advocacy. One thing I can tell you right now, I am not the expert in caregiving for Hispanics. I am not the expert for caregiving in Blacks, in African Americans, in Native Americans. I may not even be the expert in caregiving in Filipinos. I am not the expert in caregiving in cancer, but I am the expert in the caregivers that I work with, because I know them and I talk to them, and I know what their needs are. I am not here to give you the answers. I am here to make you think about the questions. What do we need to do to take care of the caregivers? So don't expect any answers from me today, but I do hope that I will generate more questions in us to be able to take care of the caregivers, many of whom are in this room. I am sure of that. If we just look at the data, many of us here are caregivers or family caregivers or our own family members. So in this slide, we have Filipinos will immediately recognize this. Catriona Gray, the reigning Miss Universe. That was the first thing that you will notice in this photo. Maybe the second thing would be the patient on the bed, that young child in bright orange. But has any one of you noticed who's in the foreground? The mother, the caregiver. Usually, the caregivers are neglected, not on purpose. And rightfully so, we do take care of the patients, we take care of the patient's needs, but very often, we forget about the caregiver who is in the foreground of the floor. So what does caregiving in the United States look like? About 43.5 million Americans are caregivers. That's about 13% of the population. How many are caregivers to older adults? We're talking about AARP here. Caregivers to adults who are over 50 years old. That's about 34.2 million. A huge chunk of the 43.5 total caregivers in the United States. And if you look at the caregivers and the patients that they take care of, there's about 82% that said they take care of one family member at home. 15% that may be a low number, but that's a significant number if you look at the actual value. 15% say they take care of at least 2 patients. And we have 3% who takes care of 3 or more of their loved ones at home. 39.8 million provide care to adults greater than 18 years old with disabilities, and we have about 15.7 adult family members who care for patients with Alzheimer's dementia and other types of dementia. In terms of economic value, in 2007, spent about 375 billion US dollars. In terms of the services provided by the family caregivers, that's a huge number. That grew to about 453 billion in 2009, and in 2013, that was estimated to be at about 470 billion. I am really glad that we have a screen in front of us right now. I had cataract surgeries. And so if I have to look at this, I have to put my glasses on, but that works really well for me. So who are the likely care recipients? Females, 65% are females care recipients. We're talking about the patients right now. 65% of care recipients are females, and the average age is about 70 years old. What does that look like? Who does that look like? I pulled up some photos here. Pam Grier turned 70 years old this year, or will be turning 70 this year. Meryl Streep. Caitlyn Jenner. Those are 70-year-old females this year. Who are the other care recipients? If the patient is likely to be younger, then they're likely to be male. 45% are aged 18 to 45 are males. 33% of those who are 50 and above are males. These are the patients who require the care. Now let's switch over to the caregivers. We know this, right? 75% of caregivers are females, and many may spend as much as 50% more time providing care than the male counterparts. Where are the male caregivers? Here's some data. 24% of male caregivers said that they helped a loved one. I don't like that word, loved one. We use that a lot, but I don't really like. You can do good at someone you don't love, right?
Yes.
Maybe your mother-in-law. I still want to do good by them. So, 24% said that they helped a loved one get rest compared to 28% of female caregivers. 16% of male caregivers said that they will help with bathing compared to 30% of the female caregivers that were asked. But guess what? 40% of the male caregivers said that they will pay for help. That they will use paid assistance to provide care for their loved one. The good thing is there are more male caregivers providing help than in the past, but females still shoulder the major burden of care. You can see the numbers here. By the way, I may skip some of the information that I have posted here. When I was creating my presentation, I thought I had an hour, and then I realized I only have 30 minutes, so I do want to make sure I cover everything. Higher hour caregivers, those who provide care for more than 21 hours a week. Just think about that, 21 hours a week. How many hours a week do we work? Regular work week, 40 hours. So you add on another 20 hours to your 40 hours of work week if you are a fully employed caregiver. They are nearly 4 times more likely to be caring for a spouse or a partner. Among spousal caregivers aged 75 and older, both sexes provide equal amounts of care. 36% of female caregivers handle the most difficult caregiving tasks. Those include bathing, toileting, dressing, when compared with only 24% for their male counterparts. And as I mentioned earlier, males are more likely to help with finances, arrangement of care, and other less burdensome tasks. Now, our LGBT community. 9% of caregivers identify as lesbian, gay, bisexual, or transgender. We know in the US there are at least 3 million lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender who are over 55 years of age. It is expected to double in the next 2 decades. We've talked about male caregiving earlier, but look at the male caregivers who identify as gay. Male, gay caregivers report providing more time caring. Males have 41 hours compared to 21 hours. for those who are males, non-LGBT. When we look at female lesbians provide about 26 hours of care and compared to their non-lesbian counterparts. It's about 28 hours of care. And 14% of gay males provide full-time caregiving. They spend over 150 hours per week. That's compared to about 3% of lesbians and 2% of bisexuals. What are the concerns in our lesbian, gay, bisexual population compared to the non-LGBT counterparts? Well, their main concern is not having enough money. 51% of them said that that's a major concern for them, as opposed to 36% of the non-LGBT. Experience loneliness in old age, 32%. Declining physical health, 43%. Not able to take care of themselves, 43%, or 34%. And not having anyone to take care of them, 30%. Lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender individuals are twice as likely to age as a single person. They are twice as likely to reside alone. And they are 3 to 4 times less likely to have kids. In terms of race and ethnicity, what does caregiving look like? 62% are whites, 13% are blacks, 17% Hispanics, and 6% Asian Americans. So if you look at that pie chart, that pretty much mirrors the current population of the United States. But if you look at the prevalence of caregiving in each of the ethnicities, Hispanics, 21% of the Hispanics are caregivers. So the highest prevalence of caregiving is in our Hispanic brothers and sisters. The blacks, 20.13, not too far behind. And then we have the Asian Americans at 19.7%. Whites, about 16.9% are caregivers for the entire population. In terms of average age, there's a lot of older whites who are caregiving. They're about an average of 52.5. Asian Americans are next at 46. Blacks at 44, Hispanics at 42. What are the implications of those numbers? 52, 46, 44, 42, average age of caregivers. They're in the workforce. They are juggling a lot of items. They may be having young families. They may be taking care of their kids. They may be sending their kids to school. And they added on the responsibility of caregiving. In terms of caregiver burden, the blacks have reported the most burden at 57%, and also reported the most time spent in caregiving is about 30 hours a week. 30 hours a week. You work 40 hours a week and you add an additional 30 hours caregiving. You look at the Hispanics, 45% have high burden, also reported 30 hours a week. The whites at about 20 hours, and the Asian Americans at about 20 hours a week. In terms of relationships, here we go again with a loved one. 81% of the caregivers said that they care for a relative or the other loved one. 42% care for their parents. So that's about 31% for a mother, 11% for a father. There's another 15% that care for a friend, a neighbor, or another relative. 14% care for their kids. 7% for a parent-in-law. Notice I did not say loved one. 7% care for grandparent or grandparent-in-law. In terms of geographic distance, some of the other things that we need to think about. 75% of caregivers reside within 20 minutes. What does that mean? They don't live in the same house as the person that they take care of. 48% of caregivers reside in their own home. Higher hour of care versus lower hour of care. Makes sense. Those who needs more hours of care have their caregivers living with them, basically is what that says. And then we have about 5 to 7 million caregivers that call themselves or consider themselves as long-distance caregivers. And that will double by the year 2020. We're about 1 year away from that. Average miles of caregiving, 450 miles. 7 hours travel time. I lived in San Diego. I moved here to LA because the doctor that I was working with was developing a neuro-oncology program in Santa Monica. My parents are still in San Diego, so my reason when I moved up here, I'm the only child. So if they need care, I will be needing to provide care for them. But I said LA is like a sweet spot for me because it's not too far to drive home if I need to, but far enough that they cannot knock on my door every day. Rural areas. More than half of the 65 million Americans live in rural areas, and they're over the age of 50. They're more likely to reside alone. How many of you here are from rural areas? LA definitely is not one of them. So we had a couple of hands come up. Many of those are near or at poverty level. They suffer from chronic conditions, physical disability, and they require an average of 4 to 6 miles of travel to get to the nearest health professional. 4 to 6 miles. Well, it doesn't really make a lot of difference here in LA because I live in Santa Monica and UCLA is about 5 miles from me, but it'll take about 2 hours to get there. Veterans, 5.5 million caregivers caring for former or current military personnel. 96% of caregivers of veterans are female. If you think about it, that makes sense. Before, when we had less female military members, we don't have now, by the way, I know what I'm talking about. I am in the Air Force. I am a reservist. Yesterday, we just had the first female commander of March Air Reserve Base sworn in. My squadron commander is also female, so we do have a lot of female leadership in the Air Force now, at least. 70% provide care to their spouse or partner in terms of veterans, and 30% of veterans caregiver care for a duration of more than 10 years. What are some of the issues surrounding our veterans and their caregivers? Especially those post 9/11 vets. They're more likely to have no health insurance, 32%. No regular source of health care. Yes, we do have the VAs, but we have the VAs in big cities like Los Angeles. We talked about rural areas earlier. There's not a lot of resources available for them. They have a lot of mobility, limiting disabilities, mental health, substance abuse conditions. They're really unfortunate that we see that firsthand, especially here in Los Angeles. If you go to downtown LA and look at the homeless population, many of them are vets. And many of them meet the criteria for probable depression. So after all the demographics, what's going on and where are we and what are our problems? Dr. Georges, when she's mentioned that the person who will be living 150 years old was already born, first thing that came to mind was who will take care of them. Caregivers, care demands. We see a shift from the hospitals to the community. What are we doing now in the community? We have a lot of our older adults who want to age in place. They would refuse to leave their homes to go, to a nursing home. Who will take care of them? So the demands are increasing, the availability is decreasing. We've talked about decreasing birth rates. We've talked about technology and longer lives. 150 years old, who imagined that? I did not imagine that. Divorce rates, remarriage rates. Who will take care? Thank you. Who will take care of the other family members after a divorce? I mean, there's a lot of those issues in our community that we need to think about, and we need to consider when thinking about who will take care of our aging population and who will take care of our population who are sick. Rosalind Carter said this, and I always use this in my presentations. There are only 4 kinds of people in the world. Those who have been caregivers, those who are currently caregivers, those who will be caregivers, and those who will need caregivers. Rosalind Carter, former First Lady of the United States, took care of former President Jimmy Carter, who had melanoma. Jimmy Carter was on a clinical trial for an immunotherapy. and it did work really well for him. And Jimmy Carter has the distinction of being the oldest living president to have ever attended a presidential inauguration at 92 or 93. Because he had a really wonderful caregiver. So I always talk about the care between the care. I just heard this in one of the conferences, but I really want to share this image, this idea to everyone. How many of you, whether you're patients or caregivers, have a calendar that look like this?
Yeah.
Right? Doctor's appointment, 1 day a month, or 1 day a year. No, our calendars look more like this. Especially in the oncology setting, you have to see I work in brain tumors, so you have to see the surgeon, you have to see the medical oncologist or the neuro-oncologist. You may need to see the radiation oncologist. They will need to get together, plan their care. You have to come back for an MRI, and then we tell you what the treatment plan is. In 3 weeks, you have to come back for a portacath, come back in 3 weeks after that to get your chemotherapy, and there's about 6 cycles of that. But before you get your day 1 of chemotherapy, you need labs. Right? That's how your calendar will look like. So those are healthcare encounters. Everything that I talked about are healthcare encounters. So the chief complaint, coming to the primary care, telling them about their symptoms. Primary care referring them to MRI, MRI leading to a diagnosis, creation of a treatment plan, exactly what I talked about. That's what makes us healthcare providers. We provide the care during those big circles in their lives. But after the MRI, after the doctor's appointment, the patients and their caregivers go home. Who provides the care after we see them? After us, the healthcare provider, have seen them. I told you I don't have the answers, I just want to ask the questions. So think about that. Who provides the care in those little small circles between the big circles? That is why it's critically important for us nurses to advocate for our patients. That is why it's critically important for us nurses to provide nursing, patient, and family education. Because when they're outside of those big circles, they will have to fend for themselves. Patient education is key. So, I will talk about just a few interventions. I will not go into detail because I'm not here to talk about the interventions and what work. I just wanted to show you that there are interventions out there. These are very specific to oncology. And talk about working smarter and not harder. The Oncology Nursing Society, aside from your professional associations, you need to be a member of your professional specialty organizations because you'll get a lot of information from them. So in addition to my Philippine Nursing Association membership, I am a member of the Oncology Nursing Society and I get all this information from them. So what works in patients, in caregivers of patients with cancer? Cognitive behavioral interventions, psychoeducational interventions, and supportive care interventions. You just saw the 5-minute sign. So these are some of what's available. We have the Family Caregiver Toolbox. If you go to that website down here, and you can click any of those boxes and hopefully find the answers that you're looking for. The VA has a very robust caregiving program, so you can go to the VA as well. Do you have to be a VA patient to avail of this? I don't think so, because VA is a federal program and any federal program is available to the American public. At least on their website. You may not be able to avail of the services, but the information should be available to us. What are likely to be effective? Couples therapy, decision aids, multi-component intervention. That's basically all the interventions combined. Effectiveness not established, and inclusion-exclusion criteria. It may not generally be work for the entire population, not generalizable. So these are some of the interventions: family-focused grief therapy, healthcare provider interventions, music therapy, palliative care. Remember, we're talking about caregivers intervention, not palliative care for the patients, but palliative care for families in oncology has not been established. AARPs here, I just want to make sure that I mention this. The Caregiver Advice, Record, Enable, the CARE Act. They've been working on that since 2014 or 2013. They have about 40 states signed up, last I checked. So we need to work on those 10 other states that are not red on the map yet to help with caregiver interventions. And then last year, President Trump actually signed the RAISE Act. Recognize, assist, inform, support, and engage caregivers. So that is a new law that was signed last year, in January of last year. And you can see AARP took the lead on that as well. I don't think we have a lot of time. I was going to talk about translational research and how we can look at all this information. When I was at UCSD, this is the Moores Cancer Center. On one side of the building is where all the basic research happens. On the other side of the building is where all the clinical sites, or all the clinical sites and clinical offices are. See the set of stairs at the bottom of those stairs, directly across from that is the main entrance to the building. So when you walk in, what is the first thing that you see? Stairs. So that is translational research. That is how the engineer and the architect designed this building, is that you walk into the cancer center seeing that translational bridge that connects the research side of the building to the clinical side of the building. In terms of translation, happiest place on earth, translated to Icelandic. I didn't think there would be any Icelanders here, so they would not be able to tell me if this is correct or wrong. But we also know of another translation in healthcare, in what we do, and that's translation from medical jargon to language that the patient and the family will understand. But this is my introduction to translational research. So we know that basic research, and in oncology, it's vascular endothelial growth factor. What does it do in normal cells, and how does it contribute to the growth in cancer cells? They look at those in the lab, they try to apply that in patients, that becomes patient-oriented research. And then when we look at the set of patients that actually responds to the drug, they move that further down into population research and ask the question, why did 30% of patients respond and the other 70 did not? What were in the 30 patients who responded that we did not find and we will not see in the 70%? And that's how you do the translational research. All these are single path, but we know that translational research should go both ways. It's not a one-way single path. It should go from basic to patient-oriented and then back to basic. You can see basic, population, and back to basic. And in the middle of all these, it's easy to do basic research. It's easy to do patient-oriented research. But for us to be able to do a population research, what do we need? The theme of this conference, advocacy. The Caregiving Law, CARE Act, RAISE Act, those are the things that will help caregivers based on the interventions that we did in the research and based on our clinical practice. My time is up, so I will stop right here. Thank you for your attention, and